Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another live episode of the Back to the Bible broadcast. Michael Robertson here with you alongside of Reese Albert. How you doing tonight, Reese?
Good. Better than last week. I feel a lot better.
He's got that little tickle in his throat gone. We're glad that you're tuned in with us. We are very excited about tonight's episode. Not that we're not excited about the other episodes, but it's just, so with me, personally, this is one of those chapters that for whatever reason, I just don't get a whole lot of opportunity to teach on. But it is something that has been pretty much a buzz throughout our brotherhood because of certain things that have been going on between the Texas School of Preaching and Brad Harrod and his sons and a podcast that they put out, and another father and son preacher duo in Texas going after the Texas School of Preaching because they went after Brad Harrod. And they're wanting to try to use Romans chapter 14 as a defense for what was presented on Brad Harrod's, the Son's podcast. But then even as we're considering the denominational world and their use of Romans chapter 14 and the problems that it ends up producing, I'm just really glad that we have a chance to look at it in its context, address it from its context, and let's really get down to the heart of what is going on in Romans chapter 14.
I feel like it's strange because you and I are talking about we're going over Romans 14, going throughout the Bible, and you're picking out pieces and here and there, and as you're saying, you don't really get a chance to teach on it. It's like this seems like every denominational argument out there, but right here in Romans 14, it was strange to hear that. It's like, really?
Yeah, it's not one of those things I don't know. Like it doesn't. I know how to deal with it. I know how to address it, but I don't think that I've ever just taken the time to do it. So we're going to do that tonight. So we hope that you're at home or wherever that you are, ready with pen, paper, and a Bible to go through this time of study tonight.
All comfy.
Yeah, so this is going to be a part 1 of Romans 14 and looking just directly at the Bible, and here's what it is actually teaching. And we actually had a discussion earlier that we'll do a part 2 next week in looking at here's what Romans 14 is not teaching about. And specifically, we will have a video, and I have it here, from this gentleman, Mr. Mike Winger. If you're not familiar with him, he's got a pretty big YouTube channel out there with a lot of followers and a lot of views. And we're going to go through it and, just break it down piece by piece as to what's wrong in the application that they're trying to bring about in their teaching of Romans chapter 14. So before we get into our information tonight, as we always like to do, say a warm welcome and greetings to, let's see, what am I trying to do here? That's what I'm trying to do. To our viewers, if you are here in this local area, we welcome you to come and to assemble with us. This is a broadcast that's presented to you by the oldest church in town. That is the Church of Christ of Lake County here in Ronan, Montana. We're the newest church in that we are recently planted, but we're the oldest church because we're the church that you can read about in the Bible. We've got J.C. Harrison in the chat saying hello, and that's a YouTube comment, so we're glad that is coming through.
That's nice. Huh? I see it right there.
Okay. All right, let me see if anything is popping up here with the refresh. Nope, still trying to play around with that stuff, but at least we're getting the notifications, so that's good. Newest, oldest church in town, because we do claim to be the church of the Bible. We believe that we're the church of the Bible. We're not a denomination that some man built, planted. We're not a group that is closest to what you can read about in the Bible. We are simply striving to be that very article, that very thing that you can read in the scriptures that Jesus actually planted. We want to say welcome to our MCAT viewers, channel 189 out of Missoula. Saturday nights at 9:30 p.m. This broadcast is re-aired on channel 189, so we're very thankful that we have that opportunity to have that platform. If you're watching this re-air, please join us live Sunday night, 7:30 p.m. on Facebook and YouTube. And yeah, we just need to look into their scheduling to see if we might be able to get on live there on Sunday nights. And that would be three different platforms at one time going live, and especially coming out of that area, it's local to this region.
Yeah,
YouTube, Facebook, that kind of goes all over the place, but to be able to be on something that's local to this area that local people are watching on a regular basis is it's really helpful to the kind of work that we're doing. So be praying for us that we can get that accomplished. As we always do, we want to make sure that we are letting our viewership know the motivation behind why we're doing the things that we're doing. And all of it's going to be scripture-based because we lean very heavily on what the Bible has to say on matters. Romans 15:4, for whatsoever things were written aforetime were written for our learning, that we through patience and comfort of the scriptures might have hope. This is our primary motivation. We want more people to know what was written, learn it. So right there is the very idea. We're not just casually reading this information. We are studying it. This is a learning process that we're going through. And there's a reason for it. In learning these things, we gain patience. That's the ability, Porky Pig there for a moment. That's the ability to be able to endure. And that also is able to produce comfort in difficult times. And we are certainly living in some difficult times, and a lot of people are needing a lot of comfort. Well, let's go into the scriptures and see what we can find there. And we're trying to bring hope to our local area, to our communities, and not just only here, but as far as this broadcast is going out, thanks to the internet. 1 Thessalonians 1:3. This is indeed a labor of love that we are putting forward to our local community and those throughout the globe that will be watching this, because we do not want to see people be lost. We do not want to see people deceived by false doctrines. We want people to obey the truth. And thus, when we are going through and telling or teaching to them, showing to them from the scriptures what the truth is, what are we also having to do? We're also having to beat back their false ideas. Well, okay, I understand that you have this idea, but let's go to the scriptures and see if that lines up. Well, you're attacking my personal belief. Yes, I am, because your personal belief is not in line with what the Bible teaches you or teaches everybody. Well, why are you doing that? You must just really dislike me. No, I love you. I don't want to see you be lost. I want to see you go to heaven. So you got to put away these false things and follow after that which is true. Do you have something?
I'm just going back to the last scripture. It's to bring them hope.
Yeah.
You're defeating every evil imagination with hope. You're giving them hope. You're always giving them an answer to their problems. There's a problem with all these denominations out there. Well, here's the answer. There's a one true church out there that you can find, especially here at the VFW at Sunday, Sunday mornings, and we're just trying to bring that hope, and this broadcast is sharing that hope and just agreeing with you and just thinking, how far can we get this to all those people?
And it is a situation that, we're trying to tear some things down, but in tearing these things down is so that we can plant something better in its place.
Yeah.
So it's not just for the simple sake of, well, we just like going into dealing with these denominations and tearing apart their doctrine. We want to put the truth in its place. So Mitch Brewer in the chat says, greetings from Burlington, North Carolina. That's another YouTube comment, so we may not be getting the Facebook ones if you're watching Facebook. But anyways, we're doing Nothing in Facebook?
Nothing.
Okay. All right. Hey, fine with me. We love everybody. We want to help people learn the truth, and this is just one of the means that we're going about in trying to achieve that. What we're also encouraging people to do is to be of the noble Bereans. Acts 17:11, these are more noble than those in Thessalonica, and that they received the word with all readiness of mind and searched the scriptures daily, whether those things were so. Let's sit down, search the scriptures, and let's see what the truth is. Yeah, there's a lot of different preachers that are saying a lot of different things, and I'm trying my best to try to keep up with most of them. And then when I'm listening to them, guess what I then do? Okay, I've heard what they've had to say. Now let me go through my Bible and see if it actually lines up. Are they in line? Hey, fantastic. I can get behind that. But if they're not, then okay, I've got to point it out. I've got to call attention to it. It's like, well, here's where that actually wanders off the rails. And so that's what we have here, even with our Romans 14 discussion. We still have our call to action. We're still trying to set up a discussion with Dr. Nace over the matter of water baptism and its essentiality for salvation. So if you'd like to email Dr. Nace, that's at tlcchurch@ronan.net. You can find his blog, Apologetics and Evidence, leave comments there, and his phone number is also online. If you'd like to just give him a call, leave a message, and try to encourage him to set up this debate with us, that there's a lot of interest in it so that we can be able to move forward. So our episode for tonight, Romans 14, episode 85, well, it's just a matter of opinion. Now, the reason why we're dealing with this is because we had a person in our chat last week, J.C. Harrison, raised the question. It was a good question, but we just didn't have the time to start digging way into Romans 14. So we're taking opportunity tonight. So there, right there shows if you want to ask us a question and it's something that we can deal with, we will address it on one of our broadcasts. So send in your questions, send in your comments. So J.C. Harrison last week asked the question about the first day of the week for worship. But how do you reconcile that view with Romans 14, 4 through 6? And so with that, we're going to take an opportunity to answer that question for him. But in overall, we're wanting to look at, as we said, there's a lot of problems that come from Romans chapter 14. So we decided, well, let's just go ahead and look at this entire context as we're addressing these matters. Because, as is pictured here, I do not think it means what you think it means. When we're considering the Roman letter, and then especially Romans 14, when it comes to the matters of eating of meats, observances of certain days, and even towards the end of the chapter, where it actually ends up bringing the topic of drinking wine, Romans is dealing with a very specific set of points. The Roman letter is written for a very specific purpose. So even when we're considering Romans chapter 14, we have got to study it and view it from that overarching standpoint, that overarching view. What is it that Paul is addressing in this letter? Now, when we're looking at the context of Romans 14, specifically, what we're addressing and what Paul is addressing are matters of faith. Romans 14:22, this is towards the end of the chapter. We're starting at the end so we can work our way back. Hast thou faith? Have it to thyself before God. Happy is he that condemneth not himself in that thing which he alloweth. And he that doubteth is damned if he eat, because he eateth not of faith, for whatsoever is not of faith is sin. That right there has set the tone for what we're dealing with. We are dealing with matters of faith, doctrinal viewpoints. And that's specifically dealing of doctrinal viewpoints between Jews and Gentiles. Now, just to give you a taste, a quick contrast, we're not going into this tonight, but we're still wanting to set the stage of, well, what's the other side? What is it that they're actually trying to present with this chapter? So let's listen to the introduction of Mr. Winger's video here before getting into his Romans 14 discussion.
We're in Romans 14, so please open your Bibles to Romans chapter 14. This passage gives us a really clear and really important teaching, but I think a lot of believers don't realize this. This is about convictions. This is about how to handle it when you feel like something's wrong and another believer feels like it's not wrong, and then how do you deal with this issue? So the Bible's very clear on how we deal with the issue, but Christians aren't very clear on how we deal with the issue. So I'm excited to share this with you tonight because I think Romans 14 is a very underapplied passage of the Bible.
All right, so that's all we're going to give you. To get more of this, you're going to come back next week. Next week, Lord willing, next week we're going to be digging into this and dealing with some specific topics that people try to bring into Romans chapter 14 that actually don't have anything to do with Romans chapter 14. But in his explanation, you heard him say that this has to do with convictions. That's different from what we're dealing with here in matters of faith. Most of the time when people are looking at Romans chapter 14, it's just, well, we're dealing with, as our title was, well, that's just a matter of opinion. No, that's not what we're dealing with here. Paul is addressing very specific items, and he's asking these individuals, hast thou faith? Are you doing this in accordance to faith? Then if so, keep it to yourself. Have it to thyself before God. Happy is he that condemneth not himself in that thing which he alloweth. But then the opposite is also true. He that doubteth is damned if he eat, because he eateth not of faith. For whatsoever is not of faith is sin. So individuals might be asking themselves, well, how are you getting it that this is actually coming down to doctrinal points and not matters of opinion? We have to ask the question, where is it that we get our faith? Where does faith come from, Reese?
Romans 10:17.
All right. Romans 10:17. So then faith cometh by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. This is not your personal feeling that Paul is dealing with in Romans chapter 14. Romans 14 is dealing with Jew and Gentile relationships, and they're coming together in one body. So when we're considering in this context, that's the target audience. You go all the way back to Romans chapter 1, Romans chapter 2. Romans chapter 1 starts out with all the problems that the Gentiles have. All right, yeah, the Gentiles have a lot of problems. We get over to Romans chapter 2, then we started getting on the problems that the Jews have.
No.
Yeah, the Jews have a lot of problems too. What are we concluding? Romans 3. All are under sin. You're on the same level. You're on the same page here. And then the questions end up being raised by the Jewish audience. Well, if that's true, then what purpose is there of the law? So here's Romans 11. And this is really what's setting the tone for the conversation for Romans 12, 13, and then moving on into 14. Here's the discussion that was being had before. And this is discussing about Gentiles being grafted in, Gentiles being brought in. And so let's go over here to the Bible program because there's a little bit more in the context that we need to look at to get the full picture of it. So Romans, let's go to 11. That was 16. Yeah. Actually, no. Hold on a second. Yeah, let's go just a little bit more because he raises the point about the Gentiles here. Okay, so here's Romans 11. And I need to get that queued up so I can get everything zoned in and framed in because I didn't do it before time. Apologies. Bear with me.
We're professionals. I'm just going to say it every time.
All right, so here's Romans 11. Let's start in verse 11. I say then, have they stumbled that they should fall? Speaking of Jews, God forbid, but rather through their fall, salvation has come unto the Gentiles for to provoke them to jealousy. So here's what's happening. The Jews are falling short from what they should have been ready to receive from the Old Testament. Jesus has come, the Messiah is here, you should have received him, you should have been the first ones to believe, but you're not. Because of that, we're going over to the Gentiles, and the Gentiles are ready to receive it. Verse 12, now if the fall of them be the riches of the world, and the diminishing of them the riches of the Gentiles, how much more their fullness? Here is what Paul is setting up. For I speak to you Gentiles, inasmuch as I am the apostle of the Gentiles, I magnify mine office. If by any means I may provoke to emulation them which are my flesh, I might save some of them. For if the casting away of them be the reconciling of the world, what shall the receiving of them be but life from the dead? Here's the argument that Paul's laying out. Gentiles, if you are benefiting so greatly because the Jews are falling short, just imagine how much more benefit there would be if they would actually obey the gospel. Thus, that then leads into the conversation that he's going to have in verse 16 of Romans 11. For if the first fruit be holy, the lump is also holy, and if the root be holy, so are the branches. And if some of the branches be broken off, and thou, being a wild olive tree, wert grafted in among them, and with them partakest of the root and fatness of the olive tree, boast not against the branches. But if thou boast, thou bearest not the root, but the root thee. Here's Paul, and he's setting up this relationship between Jew and Gentile. Okay, the Jews should have received this information first, but they didn't. And because they did not, now it's going to you. But now that it's going to you, you wild olive tree who's being grafted in, you do not boast against the branches. There's the relationship. There's the conflict. So here he is discussing the Gentiles here in Romans chapter 11. Guess who he's addressing in Romans chapter 14? The Jews are in that context. The ones that don't eat meat, you don't despise the ones that do. Mm-hmm. And the ones that do eat the meat, you don't despise the ones that don't. Here's this difficult relationship that's taking place. Boast not against the branches, but if thou boast, thou bearest not the root, but the root thee. Boast not against the branches. That's there twice. Thou wilt say then, the branches were broken off that I might be grafted in. Well, or verily true. Because of unbelief they were broken off, and thou standest by faith. Be not high-minded, but fear. So before, it's a situation of, okay, I got to bring the Jews down a peg or two. Now I need to bring the Gentiles down a peg or two. Don't get high-minded. Don't start boasting against the other because they've fallen away. For if God spared not the natural branches, take heed lest he also spare not thee. Behold, therefore, the goodness and severity of God on them which fell, severity, but toward thee, goodness, if thou continue in his goodness. Otherwise, thou also shall be cut off. Here's the tone. Jews, you do not despise the Gentiles. And Gentiles, you do not despise the Jews. That's the foundation. And then we get over into chapter 14, and guess what we're still talking about? Do not despise each other.
Keep getting along.
Yeah, keep getting along with what you're being brought into. Recognize the relationship that's going on here. You go on back into Romans chapter 3, as we mentioned a moment ago, Romans 3:1. What advantage then hath the Jew? Here's the problem that the Jews are having. Paul has just established both are under sin, that here you have the law, and yet you're breaking the law, and the Gentile who doesn't have this law is in fact keeping the law better than you are, being uncircumcised. After hearing all of that, the question then is, well, if that's true, then why be a Jew at all? What profit is there of circumcision? Paul has to emphasize much every way, chiefly because that unto them were committed, and this is a key phrase for our study tonight, the oracles of God. The things that the Jews had and that the Jews were observing were handed down to them by the mouth of God. So now when we get over to Romans chapter 14, and we're talking about these matters about eating of meats, friends, we're not dealing with personal beliefs here. We are dealing with the oracles of God. Is it of faith? Are you in observance? Are you observing it in faith? Then Paul would say, keep it to yourself. But I didn't think I was supposed to keep my faith to myself. I thought I was supposed to be involved in the process of sharing my faith. Romans 14 is showing us that, in fact, no, that's actually not the case. What is also helpful in properly understanding Romans 14 is to attach the context of 1 Corinthians chapter 8 and 1 Corinthians chapter 10. Romans 14 is dealing with the matter of eating of meats. Guess what? 1 Corinthians 8 is also dealing with the matter of eating of meats, and there's a lot of similarity between the language. Romans 14:1, him that is weak in the faith receive ye. So there's our subject matter. But not to doubtful disputation. You travel over to 1 Corinthians 8:7, this is what Paul has to say about the matter over there. Howbeit there is not in every man that knowledge, for some with conscience of the idol unto this hour eat it as a thing offered unto an idol, their conscience being weak is defiled. So here's what we're dealing with. We are dealing with weak brethren. Well, who are the weak brethren? The weak brethren are those that are saying, well, we shouldn't eat these kind of meats. So actually in that context, Paul is calling the Jews weak.
Mm-hmm.
You're looking at this, and based upon what God has said to you in the past, and now that it's changed, but yet you can't get past that. And now you're trying to bring these other individuals that are not under that law, under that system, and you're trying to bring them under bondage. In the Corinthian letter, the situation is flipped. Now we're arguing this from the Gentile position, and the Gentiles now have this issue because, well, here are these meats that are being offered unto idols. We're not supposed to have anything to do with idols, not have anything to do with idolatry, so that means we can't eat the meat. And Paul is establishing that. It's like, no, now that's going to another extreme. What we're dealing with here are those that have some misunderstanding or some type of hang-up that they are, in fact, needing to get over. These are not matters of opinion. These are, in fact, doctrinal points that they're having to work out together. And that's important for us to realize because a lot of people would look at Romans chapter 14 and it's just, oh, well, this is where we get to go and use as a scapegoat when there's something that we just cannot agree on.
It's a buffer between you and me.
Right, yeah, exactly. So if we go back here to Mike Winger's thumbnail, and that's really what I was wanting to use. You can see here for his Romans 14 video, the thumbnail says in big letters, we don't need to agree. And he's trying to use Romans 14 for that. Well, if that's true, then why is Paul even writing this section of the letter then? well, we don't have to agree on these things, so guess what? Let's just not talk about it. And he even says that in this chapter. Hey, if you're doing it by faith, then just keep it to yourself. And he would even say the same thing in 1 Corinthians chapter 10 about going to an unbeliever's house and eating the meat. Paul says, don't even ask about it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, don't sit down at the table. Was this offered to an idol? More than likely it was. Does that matter? No, because an idol is not anything that has not done anything to the meat. So Paul says, you go in, you eat without asking any question for conscience sake. That's what we're doing here. So for this very topic to be addressed is showing the elements of in 1 Corinthians 8, okay, I'm writing about this so that you can get past this.
Mm-hmm.
Romans 14 is the same situation. Why am I writing this section? So that you both are able to grow past this disagreement. And even with that, the very idea that Mike Winger is going to have that in his thumbnail, when 1 Corinthians chapter 1 and verse 10, Paul is writing to these brethren. He says, now I beseech you, brethren, by the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that you all speak the same thing, that there be no divisions among you, but that you be perfectly joined together in the same mind, in the same judgment. How are we supposed to speak the same thing if we don't have to agree on stuff?
I don't get people when they say that no one's going to get the same thing from reading the Bible that the other person's going to get. It right here it says that there be no divisions among you. But then people will want to divide over that. No, we can't agree on everything, this and that, and it's so easily formulated for humans to understand what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the ignorance, it's the, no, I don't want to understand what you're saying. I want to live in my sin. I want to do these bad things. I want to live my own way. I want to be in my own church, do my own thing. I don't want to be a part of your church. And that's how they preface it, is I don't want to be a part of your church.
Right.
It's not my church. It's Christ's church. So when they're doing that, it's like they're just trying to sweep under the rug and trying to get away from actually using the Bible. Essentially, they're trying to get away from using the Bible, saying, well, we can't agree with it, so why don't we go to our own thoughts and opinions? It just doesn't work.
And it's usually because they don't have an answer.
Yeah.
Okay, you've asked me a question about something that I don't know about, so I'm going to run to Romans 14, and that, well, we don't need to make this an issue.
Yeah.
And more than likely, you do need to make it an issue. So our friend Joseph Conroy in the chat, so this is Facebook. Anything else popping up Facebook? He brings about Amos 3:3. How can two walk together except they agree? So, and even with what, as we're saying, with what Paul is writing in Romans 14, he's trying to bring these two classes of people into agreement. So here's what people need to realize when they're going to Romans 14 and they're dealing with these matters. So point number one, seeing as how this is addressing a lot of Jew behavior, a lot of Old Testament Israel stuff, that automatically takes a whole lot of application away from us. I am not a Jew, never have been a Jew, never will be a Jew. So a lot of this stuff that Paul is writing about with this issue of eating of meats, that's not an issue for me. And that's not an issue for anybody else living in the United States. So why are you trying to make it an issue? But then number two, you're in the end trying to use Romans 14, pulling it out of its context to try to make it attached to all kinds of different things. And that's just not what's going on here. But like I said, we're not dealing with the knots. We're dealing with what it's actually addressing. What it's addressing are these weaker individuals. Well, who are these weaker individuals? Could be a Jewish person that says, well, I'm not supposed to eat certain kinds of meats. Okay. Or it could be on the other side, an individual that's a Gentile, and they have these hang-ups from their idolatrous practices. And the scripture lays out for us very clearly who these weak individuals are. Howbeit there's not in every man that knowledge. They are unlearned in some way or fashion. And that's important for them to recognize. If you have this kind of hang-up, you are admitting, and there's nothing wrong with it. So that's the other side of it. When we're looking at this, we're not supposed to despise these people. We're going to get to that in a moment. You don't despise these people. So, okay, what about a person who is unclear about one of these matters. I'm not going to hate on you for that. It's understandable. Okay, I get it. Yeah, you're coming out of idolatry. And now, like we're saying, you need to throw off these idols. Well, okay, I'm throwing off these idols. That means I got to stop eating these meats. No. We didn't go that far. But it's easy to see how they went there. And the flip side, when you're thinking about a Jew being a Christian and they are still not wanting to eat certain kinds of meats, I'm not going to despise you for that. I can understand that too. Because when we're thinking about these things being by faith and that by the oracles of God, we've now set the stage as to where this is coming from. We're not dealing with everybody's little opinions, little things that just set off offenses with them. We are dealing with very specific matters that are very much real in doctrinal situations.
I was going to say, how much of this also was like the Pharisees pushing on you that if you don't do this, they had such unfair judgment. I'm so much better than you that I'm not doing these things, that things, and you're just put in this hole. And it's coming to this realm of eating meat, not eating meat. And it's like, no, I can't do that because for so long, basically, I was torn down, beat over something that I wasn't supposed to do, and I just can't.
Very
I can't
good point.
do it.
Very good point. Because, we definitely know from the gospel accounts, the Pharisees were in a really bad position and bad habit of making their own traditions.
And they're still coming after Paul to this, this stage, still trying to persecute him, trying to find him, all these things.
Yeah.
And it's like, how much are they just, I can't do it.
There you go. And that's exactly what Paul writes about. He was a Pharisee. So when Paul writes the Galatian letter and he's talking about how they're wanting to go back to that old law system, he says, why are you wanting to go back to that yoke? Why are you wanting to go back and be under that bondage? And certainly, very good point that Reese is bringing out there. When you're tacking on who's in charge here and they're tacking on all these extra laws and cardinal ordinances and man-made traditions that God did not actually put into place, man, then coming over to Christianity and it's just like not doing any of that, that would be difficult. So that's a very good point. So then the next part of Romans 14:1. All right, him that is weak in the faith, receive you. And that phrase receive you means you bring him unto you. You take him in. You don't push him out. But here's the catch. Here's the kicker on this. But not to doubtful disputations. That is discriminations between doubts or hesitations. We're not dealing with matters that, I just kind of feel funny about this. Do you have any scripture about it? Well, no. Well, okay, we're not messing with that. We're not dealing with that. That's a doubtful disputation. Robertson's word pictures on Romans 14:1. This is giving us, the Greek is actually giving us the very idea that the strong brother, in this case, is not called upon to settle all the scruples of the weak brother, but each takes it on himself to do it. If you've got some type of problem, is it of faith? Like, can you attach it to some passage, to some word of God that would show to where you're like having some type of hang up with this? Well, no, I can't do that. I just kind of feel fun, kind of a little funny about it. Well, go do your study, see if you can find something, and if you can't, then we're not going to mess with this. I'm not going to build your case for you.
Yeah.
And if it's just something that, you kind of heard back in the day, and this is what your mama said, this and that and the other, and it's like, well, that's all well and good, but if you're not, if this is not actually a matter of faith, then we're just not going to handle that. We're not going to address it. Just leave that alone. We're not bringing those kinds of things into the assembly because those actually will bring about some serious and unnecessary division.
11.
Right. So here's a really good illustration of what Paul is actually writing about in Philippians 2:12. When he wrote to the Philippians and encourages them, wherefore, my beloved, as ye have always obeyed, not as in my presence only, but now much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. There are some things that we are just going to have to work out. For the Jew, it's this matter of eating meats, observing days. For the Gentile, it has to do with eating of meats. These meats that are offered to idols, can I do that? You're going to have to work that out. But while you're working that out, I'm going to be patient with you. I'm not going to downgrade you. I'm not going to, hey, go sit over there in the corner. You're in timeout. Mm-hmm. We're not doing any of that. Charity edifieth, but knowledge puffs up. So moving on to verse 2, Romans 14:2. Here's what we have. Here's the context. For one believeth that he may eat all things. That's Gentile. Another who is weak. So right there, there's no guessing about it as to who he's calling the weak person.
He's a vegan.
And that's one of the things that was funny about Mike Winger's video was he actually made the joke. I'm not making the joke. I'm just repeating what he said. He made a joke that's the reason why they're weak. Yeah. Is because they're vegan.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Oh, good times. For one believeth that he may eat all things, another who is weak eateth herbs. All right, here's the Jews. We don't eat all meats. We're eating vegetables. Paul says of this, let not him that eateth despise him that eateth not, and let not him which eateth not judge him that eateth, for God hath received him. Both of you are Christians. Whether or not you eat meat or don't eat meat does not qualify as to whether you're a Christian or not. But when we're thinking about this from how most people view Romans 14, okay, we're dealing with matters of personal opinion and our convictions, our personal convictions. This is not a personal conviction of a Jew. This is not just their personal feelings about it. Well, I just think it's best to eat vegetables. Eating meat is cruel and this and that and the other. The Jews were commanded directly by God not to eat certain kinds of meat. Thus, it is an issue of faith for them. God has done that away. Now we're under the system, this New Testament system, where there is no discernment between meats. And a Jew coming into the New Testament system, I can understand and see where that would be a major hang-up for him. And we don't have to wonder about it. We don't have to imagine. We can read it. So when it comes to this discussion and a Jew eating meat and feeling as though he has sinned, it's not just because, this is just some personal burning that I have going on in my bosom. I just don't feel right about this. No, there's a reason why he doesn't feel right. The reason he does not feel right is because that was an actual law that God gave to a circumcised Jew. And then for him to go ahead and do that is like he's transgressing the law of God. And Paul, the Holy Spirit, God is saying to these individuals, if that's how you're feeling, then don't do it. It's not holding you back in any type of way. And it's not and that's the other side of it. It's not holding you back from being a Christian, but do not flip it over to the other side to where you're thinking, like under the Old Testament system, oh, I'm righteous because I'm not eating these meats. Mm-hmm. It doesn't do anything. But because you're not able to get past that hang up from the Old Testament system, don't do it. You people that are eating meat, you don't despise him. You that's not eating the meat, you don't despise the ones that are. Understand where this is coming from. That is clearly shown to us by the behavior of Peter, an apostle chosen by Jesus, in Acts chapter 10 and verse 11. He's up on the roof, he's praying, he becomes hungry, he's taken into a trance. And in the trance, he receives this vision, and here's what he saw. He saw heaven opened, and a certain vessel descending unto him, as it had been a great sheet, knit at the four corners, and let down to the earth, wherein were all manner of four-footed beasts of the earth, and wild beasts, and creeping things, and fowls of the air. And there came a voice to him, Rise, Peter, kill and eat. But Peter said, Not so, Lord, for I have never eaten anything that is common or unclean. And the voice spake unto him again the second time, What God hath cleansed, that call not thou common. This was done thrice, 3 times. It had to be done for Peter. And the vessel was received up again into heaven. Yeah, Peter's still hard-headed, just like he was.
Jesus having a rooster crow.
Right, yeah. I got to bring that rooster back in here. Now, while Peter doubted in himself what this vision which he had seen should mean, behold, the men which were sent from Cornelius had made inquiry for Simon's house and stood before the gate. Here's the situation. You have God himself saying to Peter, Rise, kill, and eat. If I were in Peter's shoes, I'd be thinking to myself, okay, is this a test? Like, are you just, which, of course, knowing other passages of Scripture, That's not going to be the case because God does not tempt man with evil. But it's one of those situations like, what is going on here? God, you made the law that said I'm not supposed to eat these things. Now you're having me actually rise and kill and eat? And Peter actually said no to God in that situation. That is showing to you just how strong this conviction was. No, God, I'm not going to do that. I can't do that. You've made this law, and I'm not going to transgress against your law. But what's happened? We're now under this new realm where these things are fine to eat. Thus, the problem that we're having in Romans 14. Why would there be such a discussion on these matters? It's not personal feeling. It's not personal opinion. Peter is not giving this response because he has this personal feeling about eating certain meats. God had told them in the past not to eat this. So this is a matter of faith. Romans 14, 22 and 23. Is it a faith? Well, then keep it to yourself. Do not go against your conscience on this matter. But in order for a thing to be a faith, you have got to have book, chapter, and verse for it. You can't just sit back and say, well, I just don't think that we're supposed to do this. I just feel like something's wrong with this. Give me book, chapter, and verse for it. Well, I can't. Well, okay, it's a doubtful disputation. We're not giving into that.
2 Titus chapter 2.
Right. Third opinion. If that is what you're dealing with, this matter of faith, then do not go against that. It's just that simple. But we're dealing with very specific elements that are coming from things that God had already ordained. You can see that continuing to be a problem. But the realization, as we started out, you do not get to stay in this weakness. Mm-hmm. You do not get to stay in this weak position. Here's Galatians 2, and this is after the situation with Cornelius and seeing this vision. Galatians 2:11, Paul is already having an issue because he hasn't circumcised Titus, which circumcision is not anything at this point either, but he did circumcise Timothy. Well, because they knew that his... it left me. I'm just going to go with my gut. That his... No, I can't...
Book, chapter, verse.
I was going to say that his dad was... No, his mother was a Jewess, but his dad's a Gentile. Well, they know that. So what do I need to do with Timothy? Okay, we need to circumcise Timothy just so we don't have this problem. But did he have to circumcise Timothy? No, he didn't have to circumcise Timothy because circumcision is not a thing anymore. Here's Titus. Circumcision is not anything. I'm not circumcising Titus. And he actually had to go into a meeting with some of the elders from Jerusalem over that matter. Now we move on to another issue of the Old Testament law, and it's having to do with eating with Gentiles. But when Peter was come to Antioch, I withstood him to the face because he was to be blamed. For before that certain came from James, he did eat with the Gentiles, but when they were come, he withdrew and separated himself, fearing them which were of the circumcision. The other Jews dissembled likewise with him, insomuch that Barnabas also was carried away with their dissimulation. So this very division that Paul is writing about in Romans 14 that's not needing to take place, here's Peter, and he's involved in causing this division. And what's it over? It's over eating with Gentiles. Well, Gentiles, they don't eat the same things that we eat. They're unclean. They're uncircumcised. We're not supposed to do that kind of stuff. Here are those prejudices that are coming in. Guess what? Those aren't supposed to be getting in the way. And certainly with Peter being an apostle. Well, but if these are just matters of opinion, we don't need to make a big deal out of it. Why is Paul making a big deal out of it with Peter? Because these are things to make an issue out of if it ends up causing these kinds of divisions. What was I going to say? Did you have anything on that? I just lost my thought.
I was just thinking Paul calling him out for that. What do you think the Gentiles are thinking when Peter stood up and walked away? It's like, right. Okay, I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough to be around the apostles.
Right.
I'm not good enough to be, and just put it in the mindset of you're not, going back to the not wanting your brethren to fall or things like that. It's like, what are you doing to the Gentiles? And what's going through their minds? I'm not good enough, like I said. And it's a possible stumbling block right there. Okay, well, he's walking away from me. I guess I'm not good enough for Christ because whatever's going through their head. So it seems a lot in Peter's mind. He's not thinking of the next person in line.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
And that goes back to the context of Romans 14. We're not to be despising each other. I'm not supposed to be putting this person down just because they are living in this way that I at this time cannot live.
Mm-hmm.
That's the thing, is that I have to recognize with myself that if that's what I'm doing, I'm the weak one in this position, and that I'm actually needing to grow out of that. So, but even as we're moving forward, so we're in Acts chapter 10, and then we're in Galatians chapter 2, but Galatians 2 and Acts chapter, so Acts 10, then you have Galatians 2, and then Acts 15 comes into play. And Galatians 2 and Acts 15 are closely connected because you have this traveling to Jerusalem that Paul and Barnabas are involved in, and we get to Acts chapter 15, and here's what's going on. There's this matter of circumcision. You had some that were teaching, well, the Gentiles can't be saved unless they're circumcised also. Baptism's fine, but you've got to be circumcised. No. You don't get to do that. But can we understand why they're doing that? God had said, hey, people need to be circumcised. Circumcision's been done away with. But notice this. If this is just a matter of opinion when it comes to this issue of, eating meats, we can't make a judgment about it, we can't lay it down as law, then how do you explain what's taking place here in Acts chapter 15, verse 28 and 29? When the elders from Jerusalem send out their letter to these other churches that have been plagued by this problem, here's what they write about. For it seemed good to the Holy Ghost and to us to lay upon you no greater burden than these necessary things. What are these necessary things? That ye abstain from meats offered to idols. I didn't think we were able to make judgment on eating meats and not. And yet here are these individuals, and they're saying, well, we're not going to put any extra burden on you, but we are going to lay this law down. Abstain from meats offered to idols, and from blood, and from things strangled, and from fornication, from which ye keep yourselves, ye shall do well, fare you well. I thought this was in one of those categories. This is opinion stuff. This is just self-conviction. If that's so, then how are they able to make a law like this? To lay down an ordinance in such a fashion that, you need to abstain from meats that are offered to idols. The reason being is because, and Paul addresses that in 1 Corinthians chapter 8 and 1 Corinthians chapter 10, there's a difference between eating meats offered to idols and actually going to the temple where these meats are being offered to the idols. If it's in the marketplace and you're just buying meat, hey, meat is meat.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what it's being used for. But you know what? There are some people, they do not have that knowledge. Their conscience is so attached, like these elements are so attached to one another, it's just, no, my brain can't reconcile between the two. Okay, then don't eat the meats. And you know what? When I'm in Corinth and I'm with you and I know that you've got this problem, I'm not going to try to railroad you and try to run you down. It's like, why are you being such a baby about these meats? Eat the meat. I'm not going to do that to you. I'm not going to eat meat either. But guess what? When I'm over in some other area and they don't have this problem, guess what I'm going to do? Meat's back on the menu, boys.
I was just thinking, Paul didn't say, I'll take yours off your plate, off yours, more for me.
No, it's just we're going to cut it out together.
Yeah.
And we're going to put a stop to that. So here's the element that people are needing to take into consideration with this. Romans 14 is not about personal beliefs. It is dealing with factual elements that God had laid down. With that being the case, you do not get to use this verse, this context, to try and excuse bad behaviors that you're in. Well, these are areas, we can't judge one another. That's where they usually try to go, is Romans 14:10, Romans 13. But why dost thou judge thy brother, or why dost thou set it not thy brother? For we shall all stand before the judgment seat of Christ. Just leave me alone. Let me do what I'm wanting to do.
You do what you do, I do what I do.
That's not what this context is dealing with. These are matters of faith. God told the Jews, you don't eat this way. Okay, I'm not going to judge you in that. When it comes to observance of certain days, for the Jews, God said to them, okay, you observe certain days. I'm not going to judge you in that. But, however, if you're going to observe those days, you still need to observe the day that God has set into the New Testament system. We're going to get to that in just a moment. 13 comes into play. Let us not therefore judge one another anymore, but judge this rather, that no man put a stumbling block or an occasion to fall in his brother's way. This is what they commonly try to use Romans 14 for, and that's not what it's for. They will try to beat you over the head with this when you start trying to come in and trying to lay out, hey, you really shouldn't be doing this. Well, Romans 14.
Matthew 7.
In Matthew 7. Well, yeah, so Matthew 7 is more of a denominational thing, but Romans 14 is really bad amongst our brethren. They think Romans 14 is a go-to for anything that they're wanting to do that's not explicitly laid out in Scripture. And it's just like, you don't get to do that.
Stamp of approval.
Right. And so the opposite is also true. You do not get to use this to exclude clear directions that God has given. Now, that's where the days are going to come in, I do believe. Let's get through that. And let's go to Romans 14:4. That's where our question was coming from, because we were using some of Dr. Nace's information where he was calling out the Seventh-day Adventists and how that they were being legalistic because they were saying you need to observe the Sabbath and so on and so forth. And we were saying that, no, there's not anything legalistic about saying you need to observe a certain day when God, in fact, says, here's the dates you need to observe. So then this question came in. First day of the week for worship, but how do you reconcile that view with Romans 14:4-6? Who art thou that judgest another man's servant? To his own master he standeth or falleth, yea, he shall be holden up, for God is able to make him stand. One man esteemeth one day above another, another esteemeth every day alike. Let every man be fully persuaded in his own mind. He that regardeth the day, regardeth it unto the Lord, and he that regardeth not the day, to the Lord he doth not regard it. He that eateth, eateth to the Lord, for he giveth God thanks. And he that eateth not, to the Lord he eateth not, and giveth God thanks. So we're still in the same context. We're talking about Jew-Gentile relationship. So when it comes to the observance of days, who's that going to be talking about? It's going to be talking about the Jews. What days are they observing? Primarily, they're observing the Sabbath day. Every week that rolls around, every week you're not supposed to do any work. Now here we are, and we're in the church with Gentiles, and they do not have any issue about working on the Sabbath day. What are we supposed to do?
It's time and a half, baby.
Right. Getting that overtime. What are we supposed to do with this? How are we supposed to handle these people? Do they need to come over under us? Do we need to go over to be like them? Paul is addressing the same matter. He's addressing the same issue. Again, this is not dealing with personal opinion about days. The Jews were told very specifically, you do not work on this day. You observe this day as something special. Now, that is the same case for Christians. Christians are commanded to assemble on the first day, the Lord's Day of the week, Sunday. The reason being for that is because Jesus rose on the first day. The church began on the first day of the week. Pentecost always lands on a Sunday, the first day. When God is establishing new systems, when he established the Old Testament system, and that specifically of Passover, it was such a special event that he changed their calendar. He said to them, this is going to be your first month in your calendar, and you observe this as a memorial. It was that significant that he changed everything about time. Everything began with that. Now that we've come under the New Testament system, look at what we have happening. Here is such a special event and such a monumental event. God is changing the days. Here is your day. It's the first day of the week. The day that Jesus rose, the day the church began, and we can even find it throughout context, throughout the New Testament. Here they are, and they are gathering together on the first day of the week for very specific reasons. Acts chapter 20, verse 7. Upon the first day of the week, when the disciples came together to break bread, Paul preached unto them, ready to depart on the morrow, and continued to speak until midnight. 1 Corinthians 16, 1 and 2. Now concerning the collection for the saints, as I have given order to the churches of Galatia, even so do ye. Upon the first day of the week, let every one of you lay by him in store, as God has prospered him, that there be no gatherings when I come. Here they are, and they are gathering together on this day. And what are they involved in? They're involved in acts of worship. We're taking up a collection. We're observing the Lord's Supper.
Preaching.
There's preaching, teaching. We're singing together collectively inside, like as the Lord's body. That's what we're doing on this day. Now, what about, so then raises the question, what about a Jew who comes into this system and he's still wanting to observe that Sabbath day? This is not a personal preference. Well, I just really like Saturday, and that's just going to be the day that I observe. Exodus chapter 20 and verse 8. There was a law given by God that said very clearly, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. So it's just like the meat situation. Peter's receiving this vision. God says eat, and his conscience just will not let him, even though God is saying to him, no, I want you to do this. His conscience just won't let him. Why? Because of what the law has said. Okay, in that situation, don't eat. But eventually you're going to have to get over that.
It's not about the bread.
It's not about the bread. It's not about the meat. It's not about the day. So the same situation is going to be true. You have a Jew who becomes a Christian, and man, I gotta observe the Sabbath day. Okay, fine. That doesn't bother me. I'm not going to hate you for it. Well, you need to come and observe it with me. Nope, can't do that. You cannot try to bring me under something that God has actually removed. You want to observe the Sabbath day? Okay, observe the Sabbath day, but you still have to come together for that Sunday assembly. Hebrews 10:25 still comes into play. Not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together as the manner of some is, but exhorting one another, and so much the more as you see the day approaching. That would be the reconciling element between what God has actually commanded for us today, contrasted to what these people were dealing with in the past. All of their life was centered around, okay, yeah, Sabbath, I've got to observe that. Well, now I'm a Christian, and I just do not know what to do about the Sabbath. Keep observing it. It's fine. I mean, for that matter, if I, let's just say, for whatever reason, I just chose, well, it kind of makes sense. So tomorrow is kind of a slow day for me because today's really busy. Days leading up to it are really busy. So I upload stuff, I edit stuff, I don't get into anything too heavy, to where if I just said, you know what, after I upload everything, I'm not going to do anything else, but I'm just going to, sit around, read my Bible, pray, all those kind of things. That's what my Monday is going to be. Mm-hmm. All right, fine. I can observe it that way. And if Reese hears about it, he's just, you know what, I want to get in on that. Okay, yeah, fine, come and do that. But just because I get into it, Reese gets into it, I can't then run over to Jordan and say, hey, we're doing this, you need to come do this too. That's not how that works. And that's what Paul's emphasizing here. For a Jew, the Sabbath was a big deal. For a Gentile, for me, the Sabbath is nothing. Okay, Gentile, you don't despise the Jew because he wants to observe the Sabbath day. Jew, you do not observe the Gentile, or despise the Gentile because he's not wanting to observe the Sabbath day. You're both Christians now. And eventually, that's going to stop.
The Jew's wisdom towards the Gentiles should be, you might want to get your rest on Saturday because Paul's teaching till midnight.
Right, yeah, Paul's going to show up and he's going to talk until midnight. So here's the force of habit that still grips them when they're involved in eating these type of meats. And the case is true for either Jew or for Gentile. For a Jew to have a certain kind of meat when God has said you're not supposed to have it, it's just, man, you might as well, I don't know, but I don't want to get too coarse or anything, but you might as well be feeding me garbage. I just feel like I want to throw up by what you're trying to make me eat. Okay, I'm not going to push that on you, but you are going to have to grow past it. And so when it came to the idea in 1 Corinthians 8 and 1 Corinthians 10, the contaminant of idolatry was still on the meat in the minds of these Gentiles, to where when they ate it, they just could not get past that, wow, this was in association with idolatry. I'm now a Christian. I'm not wanting to have anything to do with idolatry. Okay, then don't eat the meat. But eventually that knowledge is going to come in. And this is what Romans 14, 1 Corinthians 8, and 1 Corinthians 10 are teaching us. It's not about meat. It's not about days. And it is all about strengthening brethren that are not knowledgeable in certain areas. It is emphasizing the need to be able to work together. Do not despise him that does not eat, and let not him which eateth not judge him that eateth. That's not what we're supposed to be doing to each other. It's the recognition of, wow, this is baggage that they have. And now that they've become a Christian, they're weak in the faith, we have got to help them to grow. Now, when we're considering that from this standpoint, and that's the kind of context that we're dealing with, it amazes me that a lot of brethren will try to pull this from its context and try to apply it to men that have been preaching and teaching for 50 plus years. And it's just, oh, well, here I am, and I've been preaching for 50 years, and here's Reese, and he's been preaching for 50 years, and we're both going to go to Romans 14 for this issue, and we're not going to discuss it. You are not in that category. If you have been preaching for 50 years and you're still this weak, brother, we're going to have another talk. But that's what people do this context and do these passages. It's like, that's not for you. But that just goes to show how desperate they can be to try to cover up something that they're doing that they likely know that they shouldn't be doing, or for something that they just are doing but they don't have an answer for it. And it's just, well, I'm just going to run to Romans 14. This is going to cover me. Don't get to do that. Dealing with very specific elements, very specific context, with very specific groups of individuals. So that's what Romans 14 is for. Next week, we'll get into what it's not about. We'll get into all the kinds of stuff that people try to pull into Romans chapter 14. And friends, brethren, it just does not work. So any thoughts on Romans 14, 1 Corinthians 8, 1 Corinthians 10 before we go to the chat and then the conclusion?
There was one thing that I was thinking of earlier back that if it's not of faith, it's not up to you to have to sit there and make my case for me.
Yeah.
Can you imagine everything that Paul's going through, all the missionary trips that he's going to and all this busyness, and they just come up, so what do you think about, and then they just come up with this question that is just like, I really don't have time for that. It's like I'm being whipped, I'm being stoned pretty much till death, and I'm on my way, and then you come up with this type of question. It's just, people are out there, and it's like that.
And just kind of goes to show that you kind of got too much time on your hands.
Yeah.
To where you're not busy enough to where you're just sitting around conjuring up things to get crossways about.
Yeah.
Got to watch out for that kind of stuff.
That's all I had for earlier. So.
No, that's good. Let's see here. So with our chat, Joseph Guy says, good lessons. We appreciate that, Brother Joseph. Hope you're having a good night. Context is essential. Brother Geis also mentioned. So Joseph Conroy mentions in the chat, I think the meat issue is not one of not being a carnivore, but of keeping kosher. Beef slaughtered a certain way, that's okay. Pork, absolutely no way. And definitely I would agree with that. That's in the context of the Old Testament system, that it has to be prepared a certain way, slaughtered a certain way, cooked a certain way, and it has to be a certain kind of meat. So with that, I will go ahead and jump into the area of what this is not for. Like he mentioned, it's not anything about being a carnivore or not. This is not dealing with veganism. So for today, for anybody who would want to be a Christian and then try to promote veganism, and then it's just, well, I'm going to run to Romans 14 for me being a vegan. That's not in the context. That's not what's happening here.
Hear, believe, repent, confess, be baptized, be a vegan.
Be a vegan. Can't do it. Joseph Conroy also says, same with the drink issue, which we'll get into that more next week with our what it's not about section. I don't think this is a reference to alcohol at all, but rather the kosher rule of not mixing meat and dairy. In the Middle East, there is a dairy drink similar to buttermilk or yogurt, and to eat meat and drinking that would be unclean. I'd have to do some more research into that. I'm not fresh on that. I know under the Old Testament system, you're not supposed to mix the milk of the goat with the kid and all those kinds of things. But I need to go and refresh myself on that. But when we're thinking about the alcohol or the wine in this context, it's dealing with the issue of of wine, the alcoholic drink, so on and so forth. So even with that, even on that position, when we're thinking about what the Roman letter is actually teaching, is wine, whether it's grape juice or it's got some fermentation to it, is wine intrinsically evil? That's the question that's being raised. And that's the very point that's being made in this context. Things are not evil within themselves. Even though we have taken a hard stance against alcoholism in the past, and we will continue to do so, but the recognition still has to be there. Wine, fermentation of grape juice, is not wrong within itself. There are uses for it, and that even the Bible addresses, and that it needs to be used for those purposes. But you have some in these type of relationships, and they're saying, oh, no, it's absolutely bad. Even I don't take that position. Mouthwash, NyQuil, or some other things we're talking about, kombucha. Different things like that. Those are things that are fermented. It's got some alcohol content. Vinegar. So how are we going to reconcile that? Well, tune in for that next week. Joseph Conroy says, exactly, if a Jewish believer wants to observe the Sabbath, nothing in doing that precludes them from assembling with the church on Sunday. And our sister Tammy Brown, I once talked to a lady who thought it was a sin to celebrate birthdays and Christmas, and I read to her Romans 14:5-6 to show that it was a matter of each person's opinion. Was that appropriate? Good question, and I think that really fits in for next week. So, Sister Brown, I hope you don't think we're trying to duck. I'm not trying to duck your question, but that's really going to be a good one for next week.
I'll see you next week.
Yeah, tune in next week. To be continued. But no, we definitely appreciate it. Appreciate the question.
It'll get answered.
Oh, yeah, it'll definitely get answered. All right, so that's it from the chat that I'm seeing. JC Harrison over on YouTube says thanks and gives us a thumbs up. So hopefully that clarified. We were trying, it was not for him, but he's the one that asked the question. So hopefully it clarified it and brought some conclusion to it. So with that, if there's nothing else, then we will go to our outro over here. But I need to work on that so that it gets queued up the way that it's supposed to. All right, this has been another live episode of the Back to the Bible broadcast, Sunday night, 7:30 p.m. on YouTube and Facebook, and re-aired on MCAT channel 189 out of Missoula. We appreciate you being here tonight. If you're in the local area, come out and visit with us. We're at the Ronan VFW Hall, Sundays, 10 a.m. for our Bible class. We're in the book of John, still in chapter 1, but we will be out of chapter 1 next week. I will try to make a promise for that, and we will get into chapter 2. And our worship assembly follows after that. Please come out and be with us. You'll be our honored guest. Love to have you study with us. Any questions that you might have, we can take the time to dig into those when we're together. If you're not in the local area, and if you are in the local area, be sure to give our Facebook page a like and a follow. We live stream our sermons, and we cross-share good brethren's information. Like our sister Tammy Brown, she puts out a post, she puts out a post, I'm not sure, I don't think it's every day, but every so often during the week, and we're involved in sharing that because she has a lot of good information that we enjoy reading and letting others read as well. So give us a like and a follow over there. Have any questions, comments? Our comment section are open over on that Facebook page. We have a YouTube channel for the Church of Christ of Lake County. That's where we upload our Sunday Bible classes. Our Matthew study is there. 1 Corinthians is over there. And as we go through the book of John, it's going to be uploaded as well. We do have an Instagram page, but all that's for is just advertising these episodes. We don't do a whole lot of communication over there, but just using all the platforms. Our contact information, you can email us at cofcoflakecounty@gmail.com. That's Church of Christ of Lake County at gmail.com. Questions, comments, if you have a topic you'd like for us to dig into, a video or an article you'd like for us to read and dissect and break down, send it to us through the email. You can call me at 434-429-5221. Jordan's number is 406-499-1745.
406-241-4667.
And you can message us on Facebook. Be sure to like, share all these different things across the platforms. It helps the information get out there further than what it's doing now. Helps the algorithm and all that kind of stuff. Facebook message, comment sections are open. Or if you just like to give us a call because you want us, just love the sound of our voice, you can do you can do that, and we will, we'll answer your call, and we'll have a good talk. So our sister Brown, before we go, says thank you, and she says, I hope to see Jordan back again soon.
Nope, never.
Nah, I don't think so. I'm pretty sure
He's gone.
Yeah, pretty sure he's gone. I'm liking this setup we've got now. It's definitely a lot more roomy.
I know. I got like elbow space.
Yeah, where before we're right up on top of each other. No, Jordan should be back at some point. Just new baby coming and work and all that kind of stuff.
Life's
so just
crazy.
Yeah, life's crazy. Just needed a break, but definitely appreciate the message and
The love and support.
yeah, that somebody wants him back.
Yeah.
maybe not us. All right, so we're glad that you tuned in tonight. Thank you for joining us in this time of study. Reese, thank you for being here. Everybody
Yes,
in the
sir.
chat, hope you have a great rest of your Sunday evening. Have a great week, and we look forward to seeing you back here at our next live episode for the Back to the Bible broadcast. Have a good